This morning I am going to be talking about attachment and trauma. Now, this talk was developed way before the COVID pandemic hit and way before the George Floyd murder and riots. But given our current realities and our current situation, this talk is even more important and more appropriate. My name is Melinda Cathey, and I am an individual and marital therapist. For the last 28 years, I have been living and working primarily in Russia, where I co-founded a residential program for orphans, teenage orphans, who were aging out of the state system and helping to introduce them successfully into the Russian society. For the last 6 years, I have been traveling around the world and working with different orphanages to help them understand the issues of attachment and trauma and how to more effectively work with their kids. Everyone needs to understand attachment and trauma, but in particular, the church, because attachment is the way that God has designed us to connect with one another and with Him. And trauma is what happens to us when His design goes awry, how that impacts us in body, soul, and spirit. Most people in our culture and in our congregations have experienced some form of trauma. And most of us have not received significant healing from that, which means that we are walking around broken and wounded. Those who do receive healing usually receive healing through an individual therapist. And I have nothing against individual therapists since I am one. But let's be honest, they're expensive. And not everybody can afford one, and not everybody has access to one. So my goal through this talk is to help equip our churches to become safer and more compassionate environments where we can partner more effectively with the Holy Spirit to be healing agents to one another. We need to be able to bring our baggage into the church and to find the compassion of Christ in one another. Jesus intended, in fact, He commanded that we find His healing presence in one another. We are to love one another and to comfort one another and to bear one another's burdens in such a radical way that people outside of the church actually want to come to know Him. So again, my hope is that through this talk, I will give you some insight and understanding and also a few practical tips on how we can better partner with one another on this difficult journey of life. When we're talking about trauma, it's important that we start out by defining it. There are many definitions out there, but the one that I like the best and find most helpful has been fleshed out by a psychologist named Peter Levine in his book, An Unspoken Voice. He defines trauma as an event or a circumstance where we have experienced both fear and helplessness. There's a sense of threat that is real or perceived to us that we can do nothing about to get away from. If we can do something to get away from a threat, we might be afraid, but we're not going to experience trauma. So it is the sense of powerlessness that is absolutely critical to understand when we're understanding trauma. Now, trauma can be experienced at any point in our life. So think of any kind of abuse, war, death, car accident. Okay, anytime things like that happen, we experience trauma, and it knocks us off our normal developmental trajectory. And it takes intentional work to get back on the right path. But this morning, I want to talk about a very specific kind of trauma, which is developmental trauma. And this is trauma that happens to us anytime within the first 3 years of our life. This kind of trauma is so important because this is when the foundation of our body, soul, and spirit is being developed. Without intervention, experiences of early childhood trauma will continue to impact us in very profound ways throughout the rest of our life. Now, if you understand developmental trauma, it's very easy to translate that into any other trauma that you've had throughout your life, because the mechanisms of how trauma impacts us and the mechanisms for healing are the same. So we're going to focus on developmental trauma. Now, the remainder of the material that I am going to be using today comes out of the work and the research of Drs. David Cross and the late Dr. Karen Purvis from Texas Christian University. And they have identified 6 risk factors that will cause developmental trauma. So as I go down these, keep in mind the definition of trauma that I gave you, okay? There's a sense of threat and helplessness. So here are the 6 risk factors. The first one is a difficult pregnancy. If the mother is using drugs or alcohol, or if she is experiencing chronic stress throughout the duration of her pregnancy, not momentary stress, but chronic stress throughout the duration of her pregnancy, this obviously will be interpreted by the fetus as a threat. A difficult birth. A difficult birth where the cord is wrapped around the baby's neck, where they might be being born by forceps, or any other thing that compromises the oxygen flow to their brain or causes a difficult birth, will be experienced again as threatening. An early hospitalization is the third risk factor. So instead of babies feeling touch as warm and comforting, they are experiencing touch as painful and scary through needles, through tubes, through loud noises, bright lights, all these things. Abuse, any kind of abuse, physical, sexual, verbal. The 5th risk factor is neglect. So children from neglectful backgrounds often suffer the most severe behavioral disorders and cognitive deficits. And we're going to talk a lot about that later on. And then any other kind of traumas that you might experience in the first 3 years of life, whether that is war, poverty, living in a home where there's domestic violence, living in a home where there's a mentally ill parent, an incarcerated parent, or a parent with addictions. So again, think of any of those 6 risk factors, and the toddler is certainly helpless to do anything about any of those. And they experience those as a threat to their survival. This will be interpreted as trauma. This impacts their actual brain development and their brain chemistry. They will be at higher risk for developing cognitive problems, behavioral problems, emotional problems, and health problems later on in life. If we're going to understand the long-term impact of developmental trauma, we need to understand the attachment cycle. Now, the attachment cycle is the way that God has designed us, again, body, soul, and spirit. God has designed us to attach to one another and to Him. It is also the way in which we learn information about ourselves and the world around us. Let me repeat that. The attachment cycle is the way that we learn to connect to other human beings, and it is the way in which we learn to understand ourselves and the world around us. And it is a metaphor for how we are to connect with God. Okay, so let's look at this. When a baby is born, they have needs. And those needs create stress. Okay? What kind of needs do babies have?
Fed.
To be fed.
Comfort.
comfort,
changed,
changed,
touched,
touched,
eye contact, to be touched.
eye contact. Yep. Okay. So you all have identified both physical and emotional needs. It wasn't that long ago when emotional needs of a baby were not really well understood. Back in the 60s, during the Dr. Spock era, when many of us were being raised by our parents, there really was no attention paid to emotional needs of children. It was thought that if you just paid attention to the physical needs, to feeding them, clothing them, changing their diaper, everything would be okay. And there was a psychologist who wanted to study this, and his name was Dr. Harry Harlow. Did a fascinating experiment. He took rhesus monkeys, those monkeys that are from the organ grinder monkeys, and he divided them up into 3 groups. The first group was his control group, and in this group, the monkeys were raised normally by their mothers. The second group, he separated them from their mothers and isolated them in cages where they were fed by a mechanical wire arm. The third group was also separated from their mothers and isolated, but the wire arm had a soft cloth around it, so there was some kind of ability for warmth and comfort. Now, the results of this experiment were shocking to the researchers and horrifying. They did not expect to find what they found. When they tried to reintroduce monkeys, the peer monkeys, into the cages of those who had been isolated, these isolated monkeys had no clue how to socially interact with the normal monkeys. They became very aggressive and violent, and several of them actually tried to eat the other monkeys. So these monkeys that had been raised in isolation and their physical needs were met only by this mechanical arm, they began to display psychotic-like behaviors. They had unnatural screams. They would curl up in the corner of the cage. They could not relate with their other monkeys. This began to develop our understanding of what we call today failure to thrive babies. And it began to help us understand the importance of the emotional needs of children, not just their physical needs. And so we now know that the emotional needs and meeting the emotional needs of babies are as important to their physical and brain development as food is. Let me repeat that. Meeting the emotional needs of babies is as important to their development and their overall health as if you feeding them. When babies' needs are not emotionally met, in severe cases, they will die. The same as if you don't feed them. Okay, so babies have physical and emotional needs, and those needs create stress within the baby. What is the baby going to do to get their needs met? Cry. Yep. Okay, after this, I promise you, you will never again look at the cry of a baby the same. The cry of the baby was given to us by God so that we would get the attention of other people to meet our needs. Got that? We cry, God gave us that to get other people's attention out there to meet our needs. The baby can do nothing to get their needs met. They cannot feed themselves, they cannot change themselves, they cannot comfort themselves. If they're too hot or too cold, they can't do anything about that. They cannot move themselves away from a threat. They have one thing. This is the only power that we have when we come into the world, to cry. Now, this cry and our voice is a very significant aspect of being created in the image of God. It is a very significant part of our humanity. Think about this. Everything that was ever created was created by Jesus speaking it into being. He used his voice and he said, "Let there be light," and there was light. Everything that was created was spoken into being. In the end, we're told that Jesus will defeat the enemy by the breath of his mouth with a word. The very first thing that God did with Adam was to teach him to use his voice. Adam, what do you want to call the animals? Whatever you call them, that's what we're going to name them. And in the New Testament, the exhortations to us to pray without ceasing are God telling us to use our voice, to cry to him endlessly like these babies. He even goes so far as to tell us that we have not because we ask not. When we do not use our voice, things don't happen. The way that we use our voice or don't, the way that we respond to other people's voice or not, has very deep spiritual significance. When our voice has not been paid attention to early on in life, when we do not know how to use our voice, we have lost something very important in our God-given dignity. We lose an aspect of our humanity, and it will impact us for the rest of our life until we learn how to use it in the way God intended it. Okay, so let's look now at what happens internally with these babies when they're crying. There's a lot going on. And we're going to look at 3 levels. We're going to look at relationally, physiologically, and neurologically. Okay, so relationally, the baby has this needs, they're in stress, they cry. What could the cries mean? If they had words and could put words to their cry, what would they say?
I'm hungry.
I'm hungry.
I'm hurting.
I'm hurting.
Pick me up.
Pick me up.
I want to play.
I want to play. I'm bored.
I'm scared.
I'm scared. I'm cold. Right? Okay, but regardless of what they are crying, the bottom line is that they are saying, "Help me. Help me." Okay? They are in stress and they are crying out, "Help me." Now, God's design is that a caretaker would attend to that cry with 4 characteristics. And I'm just going to abbreviate them down here. Quickly, adequately, predictably, and warmly. I think those are in your notes. If not, you might want to write those down. Quickly, adequately, predictably, and warmly. Okay, so quickly means, unlike many of the children that I have worked with who have been left in soiled diapers or alone and unattended or unfed for hours or days. That's not quickly. Adequately means things like the kids are fed until they are full, they are held with appropriate support, or they have the right amount of clothing on, not too hot, not too cold. Those are adequate. Predictably is obvious. The baby needs to know that when they cry, someone is going to attend to their voice. They're not going to be guessing, is this the time my needs are met? Is it not? Okay, it's predictable. And warmly means that those needs are met in an emotional way. Not just like that mechanical arm, just in a physical way, but there is an emotional component in how those needs are being met. Infants are in distress a lot. right? So experts have suggested that babies in the first 18 months of life will cry 10,000 times. I think all of us would go, yep, that sounds about right. If the majority of these times, because no one can do this perfectly, so we're talking about the majority of time. If the majority of time these cries are met in this way, quickly, adequately, predictably, and warmly, the caretaker is going to be giving a lot of good messages to that baby. Messages like, I see you, I hear you, I will protect you, I will meet your needs, I will comfort you, I will be present with you, and I will delight in you. These are the messages, you've got this on the second page, these are the messages of a secure attachment, the messages of felt safety. Now, when those needs are met, instead of stress, the baby feels comfort. Okay? It is in the meeting of these needs that the baby experiences love. It is in the meeting of our needs that we experience love. This is what Paul meant when he prayed for us in Ephesians, that we would be rooted and grounded in the love of Christ, that we would experience the love of God, which is beyond comprehension. Okay? It's not just somebody says it to you and you comprehend the idea, but it's in the experience of the love that is transforming. So if the baby experiences this, what are the messages the baby is going to receive about itself? I'm worthwhile. What else?
You care for me.
You care for me.
You're valuable.
I'm valuable.
I'm safe.
I'm safe. What will they think about their power? They have power. I can actually get my needs met. Okay? What are things that they're going to think? What are the messages that they're going to get about people and the world?
You can trust.
They're trustworthy.
They're reliable.
They're reliable.
They're on my team.
They're on my team. They care about me. Right? The world is safe. This is a good place to be. Okay? So those messages get deeply embedded in us. Those become our core beliefs and perceptions about our identity and the world. These become the basis for your ability to trust other people and develop safe and healthy attachments. This becomes the basis of your identity. On another level, physiologically, within our bodies, what is going on when that baby cries? Well, in our bodies, our sympathetic nervous system gets activated. And what this does is this tells our tear ducts to start producing tears, our muscles to tense up so that we can clench our little fists and our lips quiver. It tells our lungs to open up so that we can cry really loud. It elevates our heart rate and our body temperature. And if the needs are met in this way, quickly, adequately, predictably, and warmly, our parasympathetic nervous system kicks into gear. And what this does is this tells our muscles to relax, our tear ducts to stop producing tears, our heart rate and our body temperature goes down. Okay? Tens of thousands of times repeated over the first 18 months, and even more than that in the first 3 years. And this becomes the basis for our ability to self-regulate. That is, for our body to be able to comfort itself and to control itself. This also becomes the basis for the development of healthy immune systems. Okay, right here, the development of healthy immune systems and healthy cell growth. On a third level, neurologically, in our brains, what's going on? The baby has a need, they're in stress, they cry. Our brain secretes all these excitatory neurotransmitters. Cortisol, adrenaline, to ready our body to face this threat that we are sensing. The needs get met, and inhibitory neurotransmitters, serotonin, dopamine, get released. And this helps our body to feel a sense of calm, peace, pleasure, okay? This is the basis, this third level. This becomes the basis for balanced brain chemistry and mental health. So God's design is that when a baby has needs, they can't meet them on their own, but they need someone else to meet them. And they use their voice to cry, and they find out that they're pretty darn cute, and that the world is pretty good and safe, and someone is going to meet those needs, and they're going to have a sense of identity and a sense of worth and an ability to trust and develop deep attachments. And their bodies are going to be in balance, and their bodies are going to know how to comfort and control themselves. And their brains are going to be balanced with balanced brain chemistry for mental health. Body, soul, and spirit are impacted. Attachment and trust cannot be separated. If you're deeply attached to someone, you trust them. That means that they've been there for you. They hear your voice, they respect you, they see you. Your voice matters. But if you don't trust someone, that means they have not been there for you. They don't feel safe. They've not met your needs. They don't respect your voice. And you will not attach to them. Jesus wants us to trust and attach to Him. And that means we have to become dependent on Him. We have to use our voice to cry out to Him and actually experience Him meeting our needs faithfully. Okay, let's look at what happens on these 3 levels if you do not have a caretaker who meets your needs quickly, adequately, predictably, or warmly. Okay. Okay, the first thing that is impacted is your belief system. What are you going to believe about yourself? This is, I think, the 3rd page where it's just half there. Okay. What are you going to believe about yourself if you're left in this stress situation without your needs being met? What are you going to believe?
I'm not important.
I'm not important.
I'm alone.
What's that?
I'm alone.
I'm all alone.
Nobody cares.
Nobody cares. Okay? I must not be worth it.
It's always going to be like this.
It's always going to be like this. Okay? What are the beliefs about the world and other people that you're going to get?
Not safe.
It's not safe.
People can't be trusted.
People can't be trusted. Okay? This becomes the core software programming. All right? In this little baby. This is happening in the first 3 years of life, that this software is being laid down. The core beliefs and perceptions about who they are and who the world is. Okay? So if you have the software programming that I'm on my own, no one cares about me, I've got to figure out how to meet my own needs, I'm not valuable, that is the software programming of low self-esteem and an inability to trust and develop relationships. That is going to impact your behaviors. And it usually expresses itself in one of two ways. Outwardly, through aggression, violence, defiance, power struggles, or inwardly by withdrawing and isolation and depression and anxiety and not attaching to people. Kids that draw inward usually have a programming of learned helplessness. And this concept of learned helplessness is important for us to understand. This was developed by another psychologist named Martin Seligman. And he did a very important study that would not be allowed to be done today. Nevertheless, it was very important. So he took dogs and he put them in cages and shocked them. And when he shocked them, of course, they barked and yelped and jumped and tried to get out of the cage. And he kept shocking them, and they could do nothing to get out of this cage until they quit barking. And at that point, he opened the cage door, and what do you think happened? Do you think they went out?
They stayed in the cage.
They stayed in the cage. He even tried to entice them out by opening the door and placing there some food and water. And these dogs remained in a heap in the corner of a cage because they had developed the programming of helplessness. There's nothing I can do to get out of my situation, and so they gave up. What needed to happen is the researchers actually had to go back in there and take those dogs and retrain them that they actually did have some power. They actually could get out of the cage and to recognize when the door was open. So kids or adults who have developed these programs become highly unmotivated. This is where we see a lot of substance abuse. Okay, physiologically, what happens if this is your attachment cycle that has not been met? So your body, your sympathetic nervous system is stuck on in this tense state. You may not recognize this in people until you understand this concept, and then you can begin to look at people and recognize people who have really shallow breathing, people who fly off the handle at the drop of a hat, people who do not like to be touched, people whose muscles are always super tense. Okay, that's just their norm. They don't even know anything different. All of us have a window of tolerance as to how much stress we can handle before we lose it. If this is your story, if you come from a situation where your attachment cycle has been compromised, your window of tolerance is going to be very narrow. It's not going to take much stress to put you over the edge. So these are people whose bodies, their very muscles, tissues, joints, organs are responding to not feeling safe in the world, to not being able to relax or connect. My mother was a great mother. She loved me. However, she was limited by her own trauma and her ability to meet my emotional needs and to comfort me. And my muscles responded to that by always being tense and not knowing how to comfort myself. I've spent a lot of hours and a lot of money with massage therapists and doing yoga to try to retrain my muscles to relax. But this takes time, okay? Your body gets stuck in that tense state. There are many studies that have found significant correlations between childhood trauma and illnesses later on in life. If you are interested in this, you can look up this study. It's fascinating. The ACEs study, that stands for Adverse Childhood Experiences Study. And basically what it is showing is that the more adverse experiences that we have in our childhood, the more it is going to impact us holistically as we get older. So as we get older, it starts with disrupting our neurodevelopment, our brain development. And then as we get older, it impacts our social, emotional, and cognitive development. And then as we get older, we start to see the development of high-risk behaviors. And then we start to see diseases and early death, okay? If you have a high score of adverse childhood experiences, there are several studies that correlate that with a 10 to 20 year early death. So this is a super important study. Okay, so disrupted attachments, they impact our belief system, they impact our behaviors, they impact our bodies, and they also impact our brains. So you can see here that if you're stuck in this stress situation without your needs being met, your brain is just constantly flooding with this, the neurotransmitters of cortisol and adrenaline to keep you in a state of anxiety. There was a very interesting study done on the kids in Russian orphanages to study their neurotransmitters and their heart rates. A normal resting heart rate is 60 to 90 beats per minute. But these kids in the Russian orphanages, when they were sleeping, had resting heart rates of 120 beats per minute. And their brains were secreting abnormally high levels of cortisol. Okay? This means that even when they were sleeping, their bodies were never resting. They were in a constant state of stress and fright, okay, neurologically and physiologically in our brains and in our bodies. Think about what that means for these kids trying to learn. Okay, this would be like trying to teach a soldier who's on the front lines being bombed a geometry or a Spanish lesson. It's not going to go very well. So when your needs have not been met quickly, adequately, predictably, or warmly, emotionally, okay, you will have a compromised foundation in your body, soul, and spirit. This becomes like cracks in your foundation. Okay. Those are cracks. And this is supposed to be a building. Okay? So, think about a physical building, an actual physical structure. If you have cracks in the foundation of that structure, simply time, the passing of time, is not going to make those cracks go away. In fact, probably they get worse. unless they are actually paid attention to and intentionally addressed and filled in and healed. Okay, and it's the same way with us. So there is a relatively new field of study, and I'm going to write this down too, just in case you want to look this up, so that you can know that what I'm going to tell you is actually true and not crazy. Epigenetics is showing us that our experiences, for good or for bad, actually change our genetic makeup and our genetic expression. So our DNA, all of us come with DNA, and DNA is like our hard drive. Our DNA tells all the potentials that could be happening. Which specific programs get run is dependent on our experiences. So if you have an attachment cycle like this, your genes for anxiety disorder or depression might be getting expressed. And you can transmit those on then to future generations. The good news is that this also works in reverse. So if you take the effort and do the work to attend to the cracks in your foundation and you get healing, that will also change your genetic expression. And that can be transmitted on, that healthy genetic expression, to future generations. Okay, I want us to look at one more quick aspect that is super interesting, but it also has really, really practical implications for how we deal with one another. Okay, and that is looking at the structure of our brain. You have this on the next page. Okay, so when our brain develops, let's see, I think I'll go here. Okay, this is our brain stem. And this is responsible for all of the functions within our body that keep us alive that we pay no attention to. They're automatic, like our digestion, our respiration, our heart rate, all of this stuff. Okay? This is fully formed when we are born. This is our unconscious brain that is responsible for our survival automatically. The next part of our brain that develops is this part, our limbic part of our brain. Okay, and this is our emotional brain. Okay, there's a lot of things that are going on here, but I'm going to summarize and name 3 things that are important for our conversation. So in this part of the brain, this is the part of the brain that is exclusively working in the first 18 months of life and primarily working in the first 3 years of life. Okay. It is subconscious, it is nonverbal, it is responsible for processing our emotions and our sensory memory. Okay? So that means that any experience that we have ever had, okay, all the sensations that surround that experience, the time of year, the people, the colors, the smell, all of that stuff gets coded and remembered in this part of the brain. And then there's a little organ in here that is super important called the amygdala. Amygdala. Okay? And that is responsible to control our fear response. And then we have this part of our brain, the cortex, which we consider our rational brain and makes us fully human. This is where we have language, where we make good judgments, where we're able to have insight and reflection, our moral development, our learning, language, relating to each other. All of that is in this part of the brain. Now, our brains are on 24/7. When we're sleeping, when we're awake, whether we're paying attention, whether we're distracted, doesn't matter. Our brain is like this radar that is on 24/7, picking up all the sensations in the environment around us. And its primary responsibility is to keep us safe. So whenever it experiences any kind of threat, it's like a fire alarm. The sprinklers come on, which is like this, okay? And it shuts off access to this cortex with all of its higher functioning mechanisms. We do not have access to those when we feel threatened. Okay. Now, this is a survival mechanism that is meant to be used very briefly in times of crisis. So think about it. If you're walking down the road and you're in a deep conversation with your friend, and out of the corner of your eye, you sense that a car is careening towards you. If you're functioning in this part of the brain, you might try to go back to your high school physics problem and remember, oh, what was that formula? Mass times distance, velocity. How long do I have before the car is going to hit me? What are all the options? And you're dead. Okay. So this is designed for our survival so that we can't access that part of the brain when there is actual threat. What do? We respond instinctively and reactively and impulsively. We grab our friend with supernatural strength, we run with supernatural speed, and we get out of the way, and we live. Okay? So imagine, though, if this is where you live. A lot of us live here. All of us visit here from time to time. Okay? This fear mechanism works the same whether you are this baby who is crying and you're panicked because you're hungry and you have no capability to feed yourself, or if you are a soldier on the front line being bombed, or you are a teenager being bullied, or you are a spouse in a domestic violent situation, the mechanism is the same. You are living out of this fear brain and you don't have access to the higher functioning parts of your brain. You're acting impulsively, defensively, okay, instinctively. How do we respond to one another? How do we live with one another so that we calm each other's amygdala, so we love each other the way Jesus told us to? Well, I love 1 John 4:18, and after studying this, it has become much more important and profound to me. 1 John 4:18 tells us that perfect love casts out all fear. Perfect love gets us out of here. Perfect love calms us. Perfect love tells us we're safe. How do we interact practically with one another so that we can do that? Well, actually it's quite simple, and thankfully you don't need a PhD in neuroscience to do this. People who love each other well do these things instinctively. Basically, what we're going to do is we want to redo each other's attachment cycles whenever we're interacting with each other and redoing it right. We want to give each other the messages of the secure attachment. I see you. I hear you. I delight in you. I will be present with you. I will comfort you. Okay? By doing these things, we are actually healing the cracks in those foundations. we are actually changing each other's brain chemistry. Every interaction that we have with each other impacts our brain chemistry. It's never neutral. We are always impacting each other's brain chemistry. We are either helping to secrete excitatory neurotransmitters or inhibitory. Okay? So, specifically, what can we do? Well, the first thing is that we want to help each other get our voices back. Okay? And I think I mentioned this. This is on the last page in your pamphlet. Okay? We want to help each other get our voices back. What does that mean? Well, that means that we actually ask each other to use their voices. Okay. We actually want to hear people. We ask them, how can I be there for you? What do you need? What would you like me to do? Okay? Now, just because we ask that does not mean that we can actually do everything that they say. We're not going to be able to say yes to everything. But we are obligated to listen, to value what they say, to consider what they say when others speak. Jesus did this all the time when he was on the road, right? He was on the road and someone would be there crying out to him and he would say, "What do you want me to do for you?" I think it's safe to assume that he already knew. And yet he asked them anyway. He wanted them again to use their voice. Okay, I'm going to mention 8 other things real quickly that we can do to help calm each other's amygdala and change each other's brain chemistry and create safe, compassionate environments for one another. These are all nonverbal communication skills. Okay? So communication experts will tell us that 93% of communication is nonverbal. And so we need to learn to pay attention to this in ourselves and to intentionally use it to communicate the messages that we want to communicate. The first one is eye gaze. People respond to what they see in your eyes, not to what they hear. Okay. What you really feel about someone is communicated through your eyes. There's this phrase that says, your eyes don't lie. And that's true. What you really feel and think about someone is communicated through your eyes. So we want to learn to communicate to one another, just like a newborn parents that are looking at their baby with just pure delight and joy, and they have their first poopy diaper and it doesn't matter, there's just joy, belief, thinking about all the opportunities. That's what we want to communicate by our eye gaze to others. Touch, okay? It's not a coincidence that the biggest organ in our body is our skin. We are designed to be touched. Okay. Now, I know for some of us that this is not comfortable and we need to respect each other's boundaries. If someone is coming from an abusive background and touch is not comfortable for them, we need to respect that. But we need to all grow in our ability to both give and receive safe, non-sexual touch. This is critical to our overall health and comfort. Tone of voice. We are all really greatly impacted by someone's tone of voice. Do you know when you see mothers and they see their born babies and they talk with this voice like this? Does anybody ever teach mothers to do that? No. It just happens instinctively. Why do they do that? Because that high-pitched, playful, melodic voice releases dopamine in that baby. The same neurotransmitter that gets released when you do drugs or when you eat chocolate, okay, is released by that playful tone of voice. Undistracted attention. This is the gift to one another of presence. We have got to learn to put our screens down, to be with each other in undistracted, focused attention. It is powerfully, powerfully healing and calming. Body postures. Our body postures can communicate a sense of openness and safety, or closed and threatening. People respond to our body postures. Playing, okay? Playing is the greatest way to communicate delight in someone. And we all need to increase our repertoire for playing. For some of us, playing is knitting, quilting. For some, it's rock climbing, kayaking, playing football, cooking, coloring, board games, whatever. We need to learn to play with each other in your language, and you need to learn to play in my language so that we can communicate delight and bonding to one another. Listening, okay, this is acknowledging the underlying emotions that are going on for someone. There's nothing more agitating than when you are feeling something and you're in your amygdala and someone tries to tell you you shouldn't feel that way, or judges you for that, or dismisses that. Is that helpful? No. That just flares this up intensively, right? But we need to acknowledge the underlying emotion. Just the simple acknowledging it is extremely calming. I see that you are really angry. I can understand that you are in deep grief. Naming the emotion is incredibly calming. The last one is comforting. Crying together, hugging, fixing meals, simply being present, okay? In these ways, we are saying yes to each other in fulfilling the messages of a secure attachment. We are saying, I see you. I acknowledge you as a unique human being. I hear you. I value and respect you. I delight in you. You are loved. I will comfort you. You are secure. I will protect you and provide you to the ability that I can. You are safe in my presence. And I will be with you. You are not alone. Think about it. If this was your experience, everywhere that you went, at home, at work, at the bank, at the grocery store, at the gym, everywhere you went, you felt delighted in, comforted, safe. Would you feel different? Would you respond to other people differently? I think so. God's desire is that we would experience, not hear, experience these messages consistently in our relationships with one another and with Him. He desired for our physical families to set us up perfectly to believe in His unconditional love, that He would perfectly meet our needs. To whatever degree our programming has been broken, this will hinder our ability to trust the Father and one another. But nevertheless, even if our mothers and fathers abandon us, He promises us that He will not. He is the Good Shepherd. He is the perfect Father. If you look closely at these messages of a secure attachment, these are the names of God. These are His revealed character and promises to us. He is the God who sees us. He is the God who hears us. He is the God of comfort, the God who sings over us with delight. He is the God who will meet our needs, provide for us, protect us, and never, ever leave us. If you do not experience these with the Lord, I encourage you to go back here and to use your voice and become that little baby, to become more dependent on Him, to cry out to Him ceaselessly and watch Him faithfully meet your needs. And as for our experiencing these messages with one another, regardless of whether or not we receive these in our upbringing, we can all learn to grow in these and do these to one another. And by doing that, we can become the healing body of Christ that He desired us to be.